Bienvenue to Bonjour Paris Live. Our online event series, free for Bonjour Paris members, offers expert lectures, discovery talks, and conversations about la vie française. In between your trips to France, we're here to inspire you. Bonjour Paris has been online since 1995, almost as old as the internet itself. Our website is packed with interesting articles about the culture and history of Paris. And now, thanks to the support of our growing membership base, we're able to showcase new offerings like video and online talks. For details about all the benefits of Bonjour Paris membership, visit our membership page on our website. Enjoy today's presentation and à bientôt!
Welcome to Bonjour Paris Live. I'm Martha Sessoms, and thank you for joining us today for part 2 of Ile de la Cité, the Cradle of Paris, with journalist Jeffrey Iverson. Part 2 is a continuation of the series Jeffrey is hosting about both the ancient history of the island and today's modern and places to visit. Today's webinar will illustrate that the Ile de la Cité is one of the best places to experience the complementary blend of old Paris and new Paris. With Jeffrey, we'll walk the ancient streets of old Paris while meeting some shopkeepers and craftspeople and restaurateurs who have reinvented the Ile de la Cité to keep it lively and exciting, as has been done for 2,000 years. So now I would like to ask Jeffrey to join us. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hello.
Hey there.
Thanks, Martha. That was such a lovely introduction. You really encapsulated what this is. What's so exciting about this island.
It's very, very interesting. Let me provide some information about Jeffrey for anyone who is not familiar with his work. Jeffrey is a graduate of NYU Institute of French Studies and School of Journalism and has lived in Paris since the year 2000. His stories of chefs, winemakers, and artists have appeared in many publications like France Today, along with Time Magazine, The Centurion, and Departures Magazine. France Media has compiled a collection of Jeffrey's best articles into a special edition called Discover Paris. It's available with a 30% discount for Bonjour Paris members on the France Media online shop. Please, it's a great magazine. Pick one up. So with that, Jeffrey, let's start our discovery of the Cradle of Paris, part 2.
Thank you so much, Martha. And yes, bonjour, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. It's a pleasure to be able to return with you to rediscover this 55-acre island in the middle of the Seine River where Paris was born. As Sylvia said before, having already toured the island's past, today we're primarily touring its present. We'll go over what we spoke about in the first part in brief to start out. Let's get started. I should probably begin with a confession. It is a place which I myself avoided for many years. I only went there when I really had to. That's because the initial experiences I'd had there were mostly negative. First, it was getting stuck in mobs of summer tourists and souvenir peddlers in front of Notre-Dame Cathedral. And later, it was all the awful hours I spent at the police prefecture on the Ile de la Cité, dealing with the French bureaucracy for my work papers and resident permits. And besides all that, I didn't see a lot of charm or beauty there. I just saw mainly these wide, boring streets that had been carved out and straight through the island in the late 1800s. But today, we'll discover another side of the Ile de la Cité. And hopefully, along the way, we'll help rehabilitate this image of this amazing island for others like myself who never really felt it was worth exploring. Because actually, there is a lot of beauty there. It's actually a delightful place to explore, a place for quiet picnics along the quays, for going on history walks, It's a place for visiting centuries-old shops and ateliers. And it's a place for enjoying French cuisine in historic settings. It's a place that embodies the way Paris has reinvented itself time and again for more than 2,000 years. For those of you who were not here last time, I'm going to give you a short recap of what we discovered together in part one. You might find it helpful later on when we start exploring the streets and shops as they are today, as we'll see as the island's past is echoed in the present. This talk is inspired by an article I wrote for France Today in 2022. It was the last of 40 profiles that I wrote about the streets and neighborhoods of Paris in the Parisian Walkways column for France Today magazine. It turned out to be a fitting place to end a column about streets, because all the roads in France lead to a single spot, Ile de la Cité. That's where we began our tour in part one, a short walk from the Cité metro stop to the middle of the Parvis de Notre-Dame. That's the vast plaza in front of Notre-Dame. Here on the ground, you find the point from which map makers calculate distances between Paris and every part of the country. From there, we headed down into the archaeological crypt hidden underneath the cobblestone square. And we visited the vestiges of this entire 4th century neighborhood there, all dating back to the era when Paris was a Gallo-Roman port city named Lutece. We were reminded that after conquering the Gauls around 52 BC, the Romans laid out Lutece over the left bank of the Seine. And we learned that around 2 centuries after its founding, the threat of so-called barbarian tribes forced the Romans to retreat onto Ile de la Cité, which they fortified with these 7-foot walls that 600 years later they rebuilt to defend against the Viking invasions. We learned that the most fascinating archaeological discovery of Ile de la Cité was made in the 18th century underneath the nave of Notre-Dame. It was called the Pilier des Notes, a pillar of sculpted stones dating back to between 14 and 37 AD, with an inscription from the local ship owners guild honoring Roman emperor. What made it truly fascinating was it wasn't only decorated with Roman gods like Vulcan and Jupiter, but also with non-Roman divinities, Gallic gods like Smertrios, god of war, and even the horned god of nature, Cernunnos. As Laurent Deutsch said in his History of Paris metronome, the pillar of the boatman is like a bookmark in French history, marking the very moment when the Gallo-Roman civilization was set in stone. We learned that the vestiges of this Gallo-Roman Paris can also be seen in the entire layout of the island, where the seat of political power has always been situated in a palace on the western side of the island, while spiritual power was always localized on the eastern side, where Notre-Dame stands today. On the western side of the island is where the Romans built a fortified palace from which to rule their province. And after the Romans were kicked out of Clovis, the first king of the Franks, made Paris the capital of his kingdom, and he took the Roman governor's palace as his residence. So this same site, built and rebuilt, remained the seat of power for all French kings until the late 14th century, when Charles IV transformed it into the seat of French judicial power, the conciergerie that we know today. And I talked about the kind of awe we feel when we visit these great monuments of medieval Paris, Notre-Dame and the conciergerie. It's an awe, I think, that you feel because they symbolize this period of history when this island was one of the most important, powerful places in all of Europe. We visited the conciergerie and walked its great halls and visited its 12th century kitchens, where the France's first celebrity chef, known as Taillevent, transformed French gastronomy into a form of diplomatic power through historic banquets he prepared. We saw the cell where Marie Antoinette spent her last hours and the magnificent Sainte Chapel that King St. Louis had built in 1248 to house the crown of thorns, as well as 21 other relics he acquired during the Crusades. We noted that, unfortunately, the medieval vestiges of Ile de la Cité, like Sainte-Chapelle, the Conciergerie, and Notre-Dame, are few and far between today, mostly because of the zeal of Napoleon III and his urban planner, Baron Haussmann, in modernizing Paris, which for them meant ridding the city of its rambunctious and cholera-ridden working-class neighborhoods, like those that had covered the entire center since the Middle Ages. They carved wide roads across the island and built a new commercial tribunal, a new police headquarters, and moved the ancient Hotel Dieu Hospital, which was just south of Notre-Dame, into a much larger complex to the north. Ile de la Cité, as it was before this massive campaign, today is a place we can only imagine. We sighed at the sight, kind of nostalgically, of the last images of the medieval streets of Ile de la Cité that were captured by the 19th century city photographer Charles Marvell. These streets, as they were just before the wrecking crews of Baron Haussmann erased them forever. Now, fortunately, Marvell's photos are not the only way to discover some of the medieval streets, because one small area did survive, which you can still visit. And that's where we're headed first today. It's the Quartier des Chanoines, a clutch of streets between the Quai aux Fleurs and Notre-Dame. For centuries, it was where the canons or clergy of Notre-Dame lived, and it was closed to the outside world by gates, as you see here. Today, on the Rue Chanoinesse, you can still find canon residences and other buildings that date back as far as the 1500s. Rue Chanoinesse begins just a few steps from the always lively square in front of Notre-Dame. But as you walk up the street, the noise seems to drown out behind you, and you find yourself in a pretty sleepy, secluded neighborhood. At this first corner you reach, at number 26, is a cafe. The cafe has a menu of traditional French dishes that looks quite appealing. I've never eaten here, but I have enjoyed stopping here for a drink on more than one occasion, just to soak up the atmosphere of the place with its beautiful old wooden beams and stone walls. There are centuries of history in the wood and stones of this neighborhood. An example of that awaits through the door next to Aubougnan. If you get a chance to peek through this door, you'll see that the narrow courtyard is paved with a patchwork of different sized stones, some of them quite large. And upon closer examination, you'll see why. The courtyard was paved with gravestones, most likely from cemeteries of chapels that were destroyed over the centuries. You can still read the Gothic lettering on some of them. They're another reminder that every step you take, you're walking on these 2,000 layers of history. This is especially true in the Canons Quarter, where it seems every address has another story to tell. Buildings like the stately residence here at number 12 was once the home of a canon. But for a time in the 20th century, this is where the billionaire spiritual figure Aga Khan and his family lived. Up the street at number 17, you'll find another home of an important spiritual figure, the Cardinal de Retz, who was Archbishop of Paris in the late 1600s, and an important actor in the Fronde, which was the last attempt before the French Revolution by the nobility and the people to confront the king and try to limit his powers. The cardinal is most remembered for the memoirs he wrote late in his life, which include this famous quotation: "There is nothing in the world that does not have its decisive moment, and the masterpiece of good conduct is to know and seize this moment." Centuries later, that quote became the inspiration for the father of modern photojournalism, the Frenchman Henri Cartier-Bresson. The decisive moment would become the title of his most famous photography collection. And he saw the concept of this decisive moment as key to being a successful photographer. It's the intuition you need to capture a great image, because to hesitate only an instant is to lose that moment forever. For me, the most enjoyable former Canon house to visit today is also the oldest one. It's located at number 24, and it dates back to 1512. It's evolved quite a bit over the centuries. Today, it is famous as one of the most Instagram-friendly wisteria-covered restaurants in Paris. The interior and the welcome is very warm, and the cuisine is quite simple dishes like boeuf bourguignon and magret. With this kind of historic address, I don't generally come here hoping to have the meal of my life. I just want to have a bite to eat and a glass of wine and steep in an ambiance you can't find anywhere else. And that's certainly what you get here. I even love this over-the-top Baroque decor they have. I brought my parents here years ago, and my wife and kids more recently. I just find the place very charming. It's the kind of experience that makes you forget everything else in life for a little while. If you can't get a table at another restaurant with a deep history, also awaits quite nearby. First, we'll take a walk around the block here. A few steps farther east, down Rue Chanoinesse, you'll reach the Rue des Chantres, which is among the most narrow streets in Paris. You continue up that street until you reach the Quai des Fleurs and take a peek just over to the right at number 9, which marks the place where one of the neighborhood's most famous or infamous canons lived in the 12th century. And his name was Fulbert. The plaque there doesn't mention him, but honors the star-crossed lovers, his niece Héloïse and the philosopher and theologian Abélard, whose affair, which began here under Fulbert's roof when Abélard was tutoring Héloïse, is one of history's most famous tales of forbidden love. We spoke at length about their story in part 1. I'll just mention again that the tiny 12th century chapel where the couple was married in secret is still standing today. If you walk back down the street towards 19, you'll find a clue which marks its location. At number 19, you'll see 2 ancient stone pillars and a cross embedded in the exposed wooden beam. This marked an entryway to the chapel Saint-Aignan. The chapel Saint-Aignan itself is unfortunately closed to the public, but if you're curious, the Catholic Church created a very nice YouTube tour of the chapel to give us a chance to see the interior of this unique example of medieval Roman architecture. A few steps past the Chapelle Saint-Aignan, you arrive at one of the oldest, most atmospheric streets on Ile de la Cité, and that's Rue de la Colombe. At number 4 of the street, there's a sculpture of 2 doves that evokes a legend for which the street is said to have been named. The story goes that around 1225, a house collapsed here where a sculptor working on Notre-Dame lived with a couple of tamed doves. The male dove managed to escape, but his mate was trapped and he began returning daily to feed her. And his loyalty inspired the neighborhood to help sort through the rubble and finally freed the female dove. The street has, of course, evolved through the centuries, but the building here on the right, on the corner, has endured for much of that history. Once it was a medieval tavern called Saint-Nicolas, and later in the 1700s, it became a hangout for the Robin Hood-like bandit Cartouche. And in the 1950s, it was a cabaret where many French stars performed. Today, it's a very pleasant little bistro called Les Deux Colombes. All year long, you find locals coming here at lunch hour for their tasty, simple, made-from-scratch French cuisine. Leaving after a very enjoyable meal, you might not notice this strange crosswalk traced across the cobblestones before number 6, but as you step over it, know that you're actually hopping over that ancient wall the Romans built around Paris, which was discovered to still be intact here in the 19th century. The island has been built and rebuilt so many times, so maybe not surprisingly, Ile de la Cité seems to have a monument or heritage site around almost every corner once you start looking for them. Be sure to look up when you're walking down the Boulevard du Palais, for example, or you'll miss the concierge's Tour de l'Horloge, where a clock has been ticking since 1370. When you leave the Cité metro stop, be sure to stop and visit the charming flower and bird market on Place Louis Lépine, inaugurated in 1809. And don't forget to head to the eastern tip of the island as well to visit the memorial to the martyrs of the deportation. It's this very moving modernist monument created in memory of all the French people who were deported to Nazi camps during World War II. Besides monuments, the island is also full of living history in the form of historic boutiques and workshops. To see those, you'll have to head over to the western tip of the island. That is where, in 1607, Henry IV got to work reviving Paris after the Wars of Religion by creating a new bridge for the city. That was the Pont. At the same time, he enlarged the island and created a triangular commercial square known as the Place Dauphine, with shops that overlook both the inner square and the quays of the Seine. Soon, the two quays, the Quay of the Clock and the Quay of the Silversmiths, were lined with workshops of craftsmen, including the Swiss watchmaker Abraham Louis Breguet, who created masterpieces for kings and queens, including one legendary timepiece commissioned for Marie Antoinette, and that was the famous Breguet number 160. Now, Breguet was situated at number 39 of the Quai de l'Horloge. He was there for numerous decades. They finally left some time ago, and the quays still remain a bastion of French craftsmanship today. And that's thanks to women and men like Dominique Canal of Médaille Canal. This is a metal engraving workshop founded in 1827 at 37 Quai de l'Horloge, right next door to Breguet's former address. Across nearly 2 centuries, they've fashioned medals of all kinds for commemorations, sporting events, or decoration, as well as pendants for Christian baptisms or weddings. Dominique, who runs the shop today, remembers the day his father announced he intended to close the workshop when he retired. Dominique hadn't planned to carry on the family business. He had other things he was interested in, but When he thought about it, he felt it was tragic for traditional workshops like his to disappear from the heart of Paris after all these centuries. And so he decided that he was going to try to save it all. The workshop is a real heritage site. He gave me a tour, and it's just full of fantastic old machines and beautiful molds and stamps created by generation of artists. Fortunately, today there is a demand for personalized bespoke jewelry, and that has Dominique's 19th century hydraulic press stamping out beautiful pendants once again, using sometimes old designs for the 1920s or older, and sometimes new designs that he creates. This passion that Dominique has for craftsmanship, it's something that he shares in common with a number of his neighbors. Next door at the same address, number 37, Francois Ballet is the owner of RC Creations, which offers this charming collection of decorative objects for French heritage lovers. Ballet has lived above this boutique her whole life. When she was a girl, her father ran this boutique and sold fishing tackle. She grew up fishing in the Seine. The famous French photographer Robert Doisneau, who did the famous kiss in front of the Hotel de Ville, took a picture of her and her dad. That's them here in front of the boutique. Today, she's channeled her passion for French heritage and French savoir-faire into designing this collection of porcelain plates, eggs, and dishes that represent scenes from Versailles, but also gargoyles and the stained glass windows of Notre-Dame. They're all hand-painted by French artists. Another historic boutique can be found the other way, just back down the quay at number 41. It also has an entrance door on the inside of the Place Dauphine at number 28. That's the Papeterie Gobert. Gobert was founded in 1830, and it's one of the most venerable paper and printing shops in Paris. They still sell their paper by the kilo. They're using the same old scale and weights. The shop has catered to the needs of generations of lawyers and judges who have worked in the courthouses on the Ile de la Cité. Gobert prints these beautiful business cards and wedding invitations and stationery by hand on their presses. And then you can also find everything, you need from traditional sealing wax to fine leather desk covers and other accoutrements. The shop has also been loved by generations of writers, including the famous Colette, who they say refused to write her novels on anything but Gobert's sky blue paper, which you see here. I would wager that Colette was once a lover of our next address as well, which is located just on the other side of Place Dauphine at 15 Place du Pont Neuf. That's the jewelry shop Jean d'Anjou and Rousselet. Here in this picture, we see Jean-Claude, and it was his grandfather, Louis Rousselet, who founded this shop. Starting in the 1920s, Louis Rousselet began creating costume jewelry. Costume jewelry was something that actors and singers especially wore at that time. Their brand ambassador was none other than Miss Tanguette, who was the highest paid female entertainer in the world at one time. She did these risque song and dance performances at the Moulin Rouge and at Folies Bergère. And she was so successful that in 1919, her legs were reportedly insured for 500,000 francs. Jewelry was worn by stars like Josephine Baker and used by fashion houses like Balenciaga. Huxley's jewelry was made using innovative techniques that he invented using glass or casein from milk protein to create faux pearls and jewels. Today, the shop is a real treasure trove for lovers of vintage jewelry. The decor in the boutique is pretty dusty and doubtless could use a makeover, but for me, that's part of the charm of the place. And what makes the boutique so special, they don't make no jewelry. What you see there is the Rousselet family's historic stock of unsold Art Deco beads, glass pearls, and filigree dating back to the 1930s, which they're in some places just presented as such, and in other cases transformed into new creations. That passion for giving new life to old things is something that brings us to Grégory Gobillot. It's the thing that brings him to work every day. He's the owner of the Atelier de Reliure de la Place Dauphine, located at 16 Place Dauphine. Since 1876, book lovers have been bringing their time-worn books to this small bookbinding and gilding shop overlooking the Place Dauphine. And today, Gregory Gobillot is the 5th generation to be carrying on this tradition. Every day, he gives people's precious old books a fresh coat of gilding or lovely new covers, which he creates using these precious unused stocks of bookbinding leather, cloth, and paper, sometimes dating back to the 19th century. These stocks he's acquired from other bookbinders that have gone out of business around Paris. Many of his clients are deep-pocketed attorneys and judges who work at the courthouse or at the Maison du Barreau, which is just a few doors down. It's where the Paris Bar Association organizes events. So he's been lucky to work on some very rare books. He told me about making this beautiful slipcase for a first edition of The Tales of Mother Goose, published by Charles Perrault in 1697. But some of his favorite jobs have been involved in restoring and binding family archives, a manuscript from a World War I veteran that was falling apart and the family needed it to be rebound. For Gregory, helping families to share and hand down their stories is what's so important about this traditional bookbinding, this tradition of bookbinding and these rare books, workshops like his. For many people today, scrolling online has replaced turning pages. Of course, we must adapt and live with the times, but we can't forget our heritage. We need to preserve things that will have real meaning for future generations. So I'll do everything I can to ensure that this little piece of French culture endures. And to see that great stack of weathered tomes that clients have left for Gobillot to restore, and to see the life of this square at the heart of Paris, it does make one hopeful. Today, Dauphine is an oasis in the middle of the city for lovers of alfresco dining and for bocce ball players. There are storied restaurants like Restaurant, which emerged in the early 1900s as a rendezvous for intellectuals and artists. If you go there, you can expect a high-quality French bistro cuisine, whether it's escargot or foie de veau. On the dessert menu is a very simple dish of an oven-roasted apple with chestnut cream inside. It's a dish that was first served during the occupation of Paris and during World War II, and they've kept it on their menu ever since. If you'd like a more intimate setting, you could head to the other side of the square to this wonderful wine shop and wine bar, Napa. And believe it or not, this is a Paris wine shop named after the Napa Valley. It was created by this unusually open-minded sommelier from the Champagne region. and he wanted to create a caviste du monde, a global wine shop. And they have this really exquisite collection of wines from across the globe and from France. You can take them home or enjoy them on site with simple, delicious pairings like charcuterie or caviar. But maybe you would rather learn to cook French delicacies yourself. And for that, you can head over to where they teach pastry making classes, usually by a top French pastry chef. Maybe you'd like to bring home a piece of French history. For that, you can go to the antique shop Galerie Orfèvres, whose collection spans from the 19th century all the way back to the Middle Ages. So, suffice to say, there is so much to do that a visitor could almost never have to leave the island, especially if you're sleeping there, which you can. I found a number of lovely apartments on platforms like Airbnb. And there are also several luxurious pied-à-terres that you can rent on Place Dauphine through the website laplacedauphine.com. The French writer who lived with her singer husband, Yves Montand, once described Place Dauphine as the most peaceful of provincial squares. It's true that time seems to slow down here. There's an air of the countryside you feel under the weeping willows that hang over the gardens at the end of the island, below the statue of Henry IV. From here, you can access the island's tranquil lower quays, which circle almost half the island. As you walk, you can ponder the words by the great surrealist writer André Breton, who once wrote that if Paris were a woman, Ile de la Cité would be its body, and the Seine would be its flowing legs, and the triangle of the Place Dauphine would be the original womb from which everything was born. And from everything we've seen, I think we can agree that Ile de la Cité does seem to have always been a place of birth and rebirth. When we visit the Conciergerie Salle des Journaux, we're not only walking on stones that were laid in 1302, but we're visiting a site that was built and rebuilt by the rulers of France since the Romans founded Paris. And when we see Notre-Dame today rising again from the ashes of the 2019 fire, we can't help but imagine all the places of worship that rose and fell on this same sacred ground through history, back to the first temples built here in honor of the Gallic gods of the Parisi more than 2,000 years ago. That evening in April 2019, when Notre-Dame caught fire, shocked the world, I still remember watching it with my son from the window of our apartment up in Belleville, this enormous plume of smoke rising from the burning cathedral. It felt impossible somehow, like Paris itself was on the verge of disappearing. And it felt like a miracle, when the firefighters finally saved the cathedral after so many hours of struggle. So it's been all the more moving since that day to see Notre Dame being steadily rebuilt, to see its wooden roof and spire raised again. And now today to see the AI images of what the site is going to look like when it's reopened next month in December at last. It makes you think that Paris really chose their city motto very well. That motto in Latin, fluctua nec mergitur, which means it is tossed by the waves but does not sink. This is a city that began as a Gallo-Roman port town. It was made rich from the boats of merchant mariners. And that boat on that ancient medallion, that could be Ile de la Cité itself, surrounded by water, tossed by the trials of history and demolished, rebuilt, but never sunk. It's a vision of hope for the city that we love, and a city which never ceases to reinvent itself.
I want to remind everyone that you can rewatch today's event on the Bonjour Paris Live website, plus any of our other webinars, including Jeffrey's past presentations. Jeffrey also has posts on Instagram under Jeffrey T. Iverson, which is one word. And now I want to talk about some upcoming event that's happening. It's our next one for Bonjour Paris Live, called The Surprising Wonders of Parisian Museums. Anne and James will share many of their discoveries in the museums of Paris, both big and small. Find out what surprised and enchanted these two museum experts and authors of a popular book called, my goodness, 111 Museums in Paris That You Shouldn't Miss. I think I have about 100 more to see. I don't know. So until then, thank you, Jeffrey, for the great information about the Ile de la Cité, Part 2. Yes, it is in the cradle of Paris, and it's a fascinating cradle. I love being here. So from all of us at Bonjour Paris Live,
Thank you. Bye-bye.